In the damp, dimly lit confines of the Silver Dragon dungeon, the heavy clank of armored feet echoed as the dragon's soldiers guarded the cells. It was a day like any other until she arrived, a shadowy figure, cloaked in regal splendor. The soldiers straightened immediately, recognizing her. Before they could even glimpse her face, Your Majesty, they stammered, their heads bowing as if her gaze alone might singe their scales. Ross Weiss, the Silver Dragon Queen, ruler of all dragons and undisputed queen of sarcasm, merely waved her hand. Her voice, like honey mixed with venom, rang out, "Leave me. I wish to speak with him alone." Her tone was so sharp it could cut through metal. Obediently, the soldiers scattered, thankful they weren't on the receiving end of her attention. Inside the dimly lit cell, bound in thick iron chains, sat the man who had once been humanity's greatest weapon against her kind, Leon Cosmode, the infamous Dragon Slayer. His once proud frame, homed through years of battle, now slumped with weariness. His armor, once gleaming with the glory of countless victories, was now tarnished and rusted. His eyes, though weary and bloodshot, still held a flicker of the fire that had once made him the most feared warrior among men. Yet, as he sat there, imprisoned and defeated, those glory days seemed a distant memory, an echo of a time long past. The chains that bound him were heavy, cold, and unyielding, and they were doing nothing to help his broken pride. The heavy, rhythmic sound of footsteps echoed down the stone hallway, growing louder with each passing moment. The door to his cell creaked open, and a figure appeared in the doorway. Ross Weiss, the leader of the Dragon Clan, her presence an overwhelming force in the already claustrophobic space. Her silvery hair cascaded down her back like a river of moonlight, and her piercing silver eyes gleamed with an almost otherworldly cruel amusement as she surveyed him. "Ah, the great dragon-slaying hero," Ross's voice dripped with mockery, the words slashing through the air like a dagger. She stepped inside, the door closing behind her with a heavy thud that sent a chill down Leon's spine. "How does it feel to be reduced to this? A prisoner of the very creatures you once hunted, the ones you swore to annihilate?" She took a step closer, her movements fluid and deliberate, as though savoring every moment of his suffering. To be caged like a common animal, your strength, your power, your pride reduced to nothing. Ross Weiss laughed, a sound more dangerous than joyful. "Oh, how predictable. The quick death? No. Oh, darling, that won't do." She grabbed his chin, tilting his face up to meet her eyes. "You're far too handsome for such a boring end." A sharp nail traced down his cheek before scratching just deep enough to draw blood. "I think a few more scars would make you perfect." Leon winced, feeling the sting of the wound. "Stop humiliating me," he growled, his voice cracking under the weight of his frustration. "If you're going to kill me or chop me into pieces, then just get on with it. Do it fast." The Dragon Queen released his chin, licking the blood from her finger with a smirk. "If you hadn't been framed by that conniving villain, you wouldn't be here in this pitiful state, would you?" Her voice was soft, but her words cut deep. "Tell me, Leon, have you considered joining the Silver Dragon Clan?" Leon's eyes narrowed. "Are you even worthy?" His voice was laced with disdain, and his expression said it all. "I'm still better than you, even like this." Her response was quick, faster than he could process. She kicked him so hard, his chains shattered, sending him crashing into the stone wall, blood spraying from his mouth as he gasped for air. She wasn't playing around anymore. "How dare you talk down to me, prisoner?" Ross Weiss sneered, stepping on his chest, pinning him to the cold ground. "Do you still think you're some great hero of humanity, praised by thousands, admired by all?" She leaned in closer, her voice dripping with mockery. "Do you still dream of wiping out the Dragon Clan, leaving behind your oh-so-noble legacy?" Leon wheezed, blood dribbling from his lips. "Don't underestimate humans," he rasped. Ross Weiss's tail snaked around his body, lifting him effortlessly into the air. "Humans," she scoffed, tightening her grip as Leon struggled. "You're also stubborn. How adorable." She lifted him higher, her tail constricting like a snake ready to strike. "But this time, you met your match." Leon gritted his teeth. "Your Majesty," he hissed. Ross Weiss paused, curious. "Oh, finally ready to beg for mercy?" "No," Leon said, glaring at her. "You made two crucial mistakes." She raised an eyebrow, amused. "Do tell." "First," he coughed, "you should never be alone with the most powerful dragon slayer trained to kill your kind." He paused, letting the tension hang in the air. "Second, you should never have tasted my blood before." Before Ross Weiss could react, Leon's eyes glowed with a strange light. Suddenly, a searing pain shot through her body, a blood curse, one she hadn't anticipated. She gasped, her grip on him loosening as she stumbled back, clutching her chest. What have you done?" Ross Weiss panted. Leon fell to the ground, breathing heavily but grinning. "That's what happens when you try to play with magic you don't understand. Soon, you'll be tormented by soul-crushing pain forever." Ross Weiss's eyes widened, her breath becoming ragged. Her entire body burned as if flames were licking at her skin. She fell to her knees, her face flushed, her body trembling uncontrollably. What? What is this feeling? She gasped, her breath coming to heavy pants. Leon watched, confused. This wasn't the reaction he expected. Was she enjoying this? Ross Weiss suddenly lunged at him, pinning him to the floor. Her flushed face hovered just inches from his, her eyes wild, her breathing even heavier. You bastard, she growled, but her voice had lost its sharpness. It was almost desperate. Leon's heart raced. Wait, what's going on? He thought, his brain struggling to keep up with the absurdity of the situation. As he looked into her eyes, he saw something unexpected. Desire? No, that couldn't be it. But her face was definitely flushed. Before he could process it, Ross Weiss leaned in and kissed him hard. Her lips crashed against his with a force that left him completely stunned. He froze, his mind going blank as she deepened the kiss, her body pressing against his. Leon's face turned red, his brain short-circuiting. This is not what I signed up for, he thought, but there he was caught between a rock and, well, the Silver Dragon Queen. The chains weren't the only things getting broken that day. An hour later, the dungeon floor was an utter battlefield of discarded clothes, betrayal, and bad decisions. Ross Weiss, the Silver Dragon Queen, stirred awake, her vision still blurred, her head still spinning. As the haze lifted, she blinked at the sight of her own naked body. It didn't take long for reality to hit hard. With a furious roar that shook the very walls of the dungeon, she whipped her head toward Leon, who was now awake and much too calm for someone who'd just been part of a catastrophic mistake. What the hell did you do to me? She bellowed, her silver eyes blazing with a mix of fury, humiliation, and sheer disbelief. Leon, ever the cool-headed type, blinked, unfazed by the hurricane of dragon rage aimed at him. Relax. It's the blood curse, he explained, his voice flat like he was reciting a grocery list. A forbidden technique that can only be used once in a lifetime. He shot her a deadpan look. Once I die, the curse will cause you endless pain. Ross Weiss's eyes widened in disbelief, her fists clenching. Endless pain? That's what you're worried about. What about this? She gestured wildly at the two of them, her rage growing hotter with each word. What just happened? Leon, still groggy and clearly regretting everything, rubbed the back of his neck. Oh, that, he cleared his throat, the faintest blush coloring his face. That was an accident. Accident? Ross Weiss's voice was now at a pitch that could probably break glass. I believe the curse's pain would only manifest after my death, Leon continued, trying to remain composed despite the fact that he was very much at ground zero, a dragon-shaped bomb. But I didn't anticipate certain side effects. Ross Weiss blinked at him, her fury boiling into something far more dangerous. Side effects, she hissed. Which apparently caused your arousal, Leon added, wincing at the last part. He immediately wished he could take those words back. Ross Weiss's face went from furious red to mortified scarlet in the blink of an eye. Shut up, she spat, the words through gritted teeth, desperately trying to preserve what little dignity she had left. Leon, however, decided now was a great time to go for broke. As far as I know, he began slowly, his voice maddeningly calm. Dragons follow the rule of monogamy, correct? He arched a brow. That means you're stuck with me now. Ross Weiss's eyes blazed. She was 2 seconds away from incinerating him on the spot. Leon continued, unbothered. After my death, the great Silver Dragon Queen will not only be unable to find a new mate, but also unable to bear offspring. He shrugged as if this were a minor inconvenience. Good luck, explaining that to the dragon clan. Ross Weiss's mouth opened, but no words came. She was absolutely speechless, truly a first for her. Meanwhile, Leon, oblivious or perhaps just suicidal, kept going. And let's not forget, he added, his voice low and mocking. You said earlier I would have no successor. He gave her a knowing look. Looks like you won't either. That did it. With a growl that could have shattered mountains, Ross Weiss charged at him, her hand glowing with a fiery aura as she prepared to strike him down. Just as her hand was inches from his chest, Leon's calm voice cut through the tension. Go ahead, he said coolly, meeting her eyes without flinching. Kill me, but you don't need to do it yourself. I'm going to die soon anyway. You can spend the rest of your life hating me, living in agony. That's my curse to you. Ross Weiss paused, her hand trembling as the aura around it dimmed. Her breath came in ragged bursts as she stared down at him, torn between killing him on the spot and letting him die in the slow, miserable way he had promised. After what felt like an eternity, she withdrew her hand, taking several steps back. She turned, her expression one of cold disdain. You humans, she muttered, her voice dripping with venom. Always so despicable. You think this is revenge? Ross Weiss scoffed, her fury only barely contained. You want to die? You want the easy way out? Her eyes narrowed dangerously. How can it be that easy? With a flick of her wrist, she cast a spell, her hand glowing with powerful magic. Leon didn't even have time to react before she slammed her palm onto his chest, sending a shock of energy straight into his body. Once upon a time, Leon Cosmo was hailed. Chapter 2. As the ultimate dragon-slaying hero, his legend began not at the age most heroes were swinging swords, but at a tender 5 years old when he ripped his neighbor's vicious dog to shreds with his bare hands. That little outburst of violent heroism caught the eye of a renowned dragon slayer, who thought, ah yes, this murderous child will do just fine, and promptly made him his apprentice. By the time Leon turned 10, he had entered the Imperial Dragon Slayer Academy. By 14, he had graduated at the top of his class, a prodigy who held the illustrious title of the youngest and was highly evaluated student in history. At 15, Leon was unleashed onto the battlefield, killing dragons left and right, recapturing territory like he was on a leisurely Sunday stroll, and collecting more military accolades than he knew what to do with. He was the Empire's brightest beacon of hope, a poster boy for victory in the Dragon War. Then he got captured by the Dragon Clan. 2 years had passed in what felt like an eternity of peaceful slumber, and Leon, who had probably been enjoying a long and undisturbed nap, suddenly jolts awake, gasping for breath. His chest heaves as if he'd just narrowly escaped death itself, and he sits up, disoriented, his mind struggling to process the unfamiliar surroundings. His eyes dart around the room, wide with confusion. Where the hell am I? The words escape his lips before he can even think. Was this heaven? Maybe? Is that where he had ended up after all his battles? His mind races, trying to make sense of it. He fought dragons, faced countless perils, and survived against impossible odds. Surely this was his reward. This strange place must be the afterlife, and that little girl peeking around the corner, staring at him with wide, curious eyes, was probably some kind of divine messenger. Leon's face flushes as he realizes he's being watched. His first instinct is to marvel at how cute she looks, her black and white hair framing her face like some mystical creature out of a dream. He feels a strange warmth in his chest. Cute, he thinks absently, before the thought hits him like a cold wave. Am I dead? His mind starts to spiral. If he was dead, did this mean all those dragons he'd slain had earned him a front row seat in the VIP section of the afterlife? It would make sense, right? After all, not everyone could claim to have sent so many dragons to an early grave. Heaven, he mutters. I must be in heaven. He points dramatically at her. And you, little one, must be an angel. The girl tilts her head, completely baffled. What's an angel? Leon, completely buying into his own delusion, grins. Ah, how lovely, a pure, innocent angel who doesn't even know what she is. He sits up straighter, offering her a gentlemanly bow. My dear little angel, what's your name? Moon, she replies, smiling. Moon? What a lovely name for an angel. Leon beams, though inwardly he's wondering why this celestial being has such strange hair. Might I ask, why is your hair so unusual? Moon explains clearly, proud of this fact. Leon pauses mid-thought, his brow furrowing in confusion. Do angels have mothers? The question lingers in the air as he tries to make sense of it, but before he can even begin to untangle the web of thoughts in his head, Moon chirps happily, breaking the silence. Mama said it means moon. Leon's eyes widen in shock. Wait, what? He asks, his voice barely above a whisper, as if he didn't quite hear her correctly. Moon, with an innocence that could disarm anyone, looks up at him with a grin. Leon means a Leon, she says, as if this is the most natural thing in the world. For a moment, Leon's brain seems to short-circuit. He stares at Moon, utterly frozen. The words don't seem to align in any way he can comprehend. And your mother, is Ross Weiss? He asks slowly, as if trying to piece it together. Moon nods enthusiastically, still beaming. Yep, that's her, she says with a little bounce in her step. Leon's face goes pale. His thoughts, already jumbled, now shatter into fragments. His mouth opens, but no sound comes out. Finally, he whispers, the words barely escaping his lips, Ross Weiss. His eyes glaze over, lost in the horror of realization. He stares down at Moon, her innocent eyes gazing up at him, and a shiver runs down his spine. I'm your... His voice cracks as if he's not sure if he even wants to hear the answer. Moon, seemingly oblivious to the gravity of the situation, claps her tiny hands together, delighted. Yep, you're my dad, she announces with all the joy in the world, her voice full of pride. Leon's world collapses around him. His jaw slackens, his knees weaken. His hand instinctively goes to his head as if trying to steady himself. The weight of the revelation is too much to bear, and for a moment, it feels like the ground beneath him might give way. Dad, he repeats in disbelief as though saying the word aloud could somehow make it real. He stares at Moon, his mind racing, trying to reconcile the impossibility of it all. I'm her dad. Ross, Weiss's child, is mine. His voice is barely audible, as if speaking any louder would shatter the fragile reality he's clinging to. The horror, confusion, and disbelief swirl in his mind like a storm he can't escape. Before he can properly process his impending existential crisis, Moon suddenly runs toward the door, shouting gleefully, "Mom, Dad's awake." Leon looks up, feeling a wave of dread wash over him as Ross Weiss, the Silver Dragon Queen herself, steps into the room. She's as cold and distant as ever, her eyes boring into him with a mixture of disdain and amusement. Moon hugs her mother tightly. "Mom's been visiting you every day," she says happily. "She must be so happy you're awake." Ross Weiss gives Leon a long, icy stare before turning to Moon. "Yes, darling," she says with a faint smirk. "I know. Now go play outside. I need to talk to your father." Moon skips off, leaving the room far cheerful for the disaster that's about to unfold. Leon, still grappling with this absurd reality, can barely form words. Is she really mine? Ross Weiss? Ross Weiss narrows her eyes. What else could she be? Her voice is laced with venom as she confirms Moon's parentage. Her tail slowly closes the door behind her with an ominous thud. Liam grits his teeth, anger bubbling up inside him. "You hate me. Why did you give birth to our child? Why did you even save me?" Ross Weiss's gaze hardens. "You've been asleep for 2 years. Did you think I'd simply forget what you did to me?" Liam clenches his fists, his voice rising. "You think I wanted this? You and I were different. We could never coexist. If it were any other time, I never would have touched me." Ross Weiss interrupts, her lips curling into a smirk. "So touching me is torture for you, is it?" "Of course it is," Leon snaps. In a flash, Ross Weiss's tail wraps around Leon's leg, pulling him down onto the bed with force. She climbs on top of him, her movements deliberate, her expression deadly. And now she asks, her voice a dangerous whisper, "What are you going to do?" Without answering, Ross Weiss tears open his shirt and begins casting a spell, her hand glowing with ancient magic. "I'm going to carve my dragon mark into you," she says coldly. "Stop," Liam protests. But it's too late. The spell takes hold, a searing pain erupting in his chest as the mark of the Silver Dragon Queen burns into his skin. Ross Weiss watches as the mark also appears on her own chest, a twisted reflection of their bond. "This will be your shame," she says, her voice icy. "From now on, you will be my prisoner. You'll never leave me. When your fellow humans see this mark, they'll wonder, are you still a great dragon-slaying hero or traitor who surrendered to the dragon clan?" Liam grits his teeth, barely containing his fury. "Why are you doing this?" Ross Weiss places a finger on his lips, silencing him. "Don't you understand? For us dragons, revenge is an art form, a concept that surpasses human comprehension. You wanted to destroy me, Leon, but now you live the rest of your life in my shadow, humiliated by me at every turn." Leon's face turns red, his body burning with shame as he realizes the full weight of her revenge. For the Silver Dragon Queen, there could be no greater honor than turning the greatest dragon, slayer in human history, into a prisoner, her plaything, her closest and most reluctant companion. Leaning in close, her lips just inches from his, Ross Weiss smirks. "Now, Leon, it's time to get started." Chapter 3. In the grand halls of the Silver Dragon Castle, the atmosphere was remarkably lighter than usual. The high vaulted ceilings echoed with the soft sounds of movement, and the corridors, normally filled with the solemnity befitting a royal residence, seemed alive with a quieter, almost playful energy. 2 maids, their lithe forms draped in the delicate, flowing silks of the castle staff, meandered down the hallway, their tails swishing lazily behind them as they exchanged whispers. "The queen seems to be in a particularly good mood today," one of the maids remarked, her tone laden with both curiosity and amusement. She cast a sideways glance at her companion, her lips curling into a conspiratorial grin. "Don't you know?" The other maid responded, her eyes widening dramatically as though she were about to share the most delicious piece of gossip. Her husband woke up. Leon, whose broad back was pressed against the cold, unyielding stone of the castle wall just around the corner, froze in place. His breath caught in his throat, a wave of indignation flooding his chest. He could feel the heat of embarrassment creeping up his neck. "Husband," he muttered through gritted teeth, his fists clenching so tightly at his sides that his knuckles turned white. The notion seemed so absurd, so deeply irritating. That female dragon, the Silver Dragon Queen, had actually gone ahead and announced to the entire castle, to anyone who would listen, that he was her husband. A furious laugh bubbled up from within him, though he quickly stifled it. If only the 2 maids knew the full story. If only anyone knew the truth of just how terrifying the Silver Dragon Queen really was. She was no ordinary noble or ruler, no meek figurehead draped in a cloak of power. No, she was a being of immense strength, a creature of legend, her power enough to command armies and bend the elements themselves. But to them, she was a benevolent queen with an enigmatic husband him. Leon gritted his teeth and forced himself to steady his breathing. He had spent countless years navigating the labyrinth of politics and power, always avoiding her gaze, always doing his best to remain inconspicuous. But now it seemed fate had decided otherwise. The Queen's public declaration of their supposed union was just the latest reminder of how completely his life had been upended by her presence. His mind flashed back to last night. That night, Ross Weiss's dragon instincts had been intense, to say the least. She had squeezed every last drop of energy out of him, dragging him to his very limits, leaving his waist practically shattered. He felt like a discarded rag, tossed aside after hours of her relentless enthusiasm. His back still ached, his legs were wobbly, and his pride, well, that was thoroughly demolished. Liam vowed to himself, his fists tightening with an intensity that could crush stone. The thought of staying in this hellish castle any longer made his stomach turn. He peeked cautiously around the corner, his sharp eyes scanning the surroundings. The side door, his only possible escape route, was heavily guarded by 4 dragons, their massive forms standing like living mountains. The idea of slipping past them was laughable, almost ridiculous. Something was wrong today. The castle was too quiet, unnervingly still, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Liam's gut tightened. He had been through enough to know that silence like this was never a good sign. His eyes caught something in the distance, something small but strange. A hole. A hole in the wall. Here. Of all places, his instincts screamed at him, warning him that it was far too convenient, far too perfectly placed to be anything but a trap. But what choice did he have? I'm not staying another night here, Leon whispered through clenched teeth. Even if it was a trap, even if it was a deadly one, he couldn't bear it any longer. The thought of what awaited him if he stayed, of the humiliations, the control, the suffocating grip of Ross Weiss and her twisted games was enough to steel his resolve. He wouldn't stay. Taking a deep breath, he crouched down and with great care squeezed his body through the narrow gap. His muscles protested, but he pushed forward, his mind focused entirely on escape. Farewell, perverted mother dragon, Leon muttered under his breath, bitterness lacing his words. Moo's cute, sure, but she's all yours, Ross Weiss. The words felt like poison on his tongue, but they were his only release in that moment, a quiet defiance to the nightmare that had been his life here. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that Moon had been watching him all along. From a distance, she observed him with wide, curious eyes. Mom, she called out excitedly, her voice filled with the innocent enthusiasm of a child who admired her father. Dad's digging a hole. He's so cool. Ross Weiss's tail flicked in amusement. We catch him back, my love. That's the proper term. Meanwhile, Leon had finally squeezed himself through the hole, adrenaline pumping. He bolted into the forest, running as fast as his legs would carry him. Just a few more mountains, he thought, and I'll be back in human territory. Surely if he got far enough, Ross Weiss wouldn't be able to catch up, right? As the wind whipped around him, he felt a chill run down his spine. Something wasn't right. He glanced up and immediately regretted it. There she was, Ross Weiss and her full dragon form gliding effortlessly through the air above him. Her massive wings blocked out the sun as she caught up to him in mere moments. Leon's heart sank and he let out an exasperated scream. Oh, come on. Ross Weiss's voice boomed from above, amusement dripping from every word. You're quite the runner, Leon. Panic surged through him, but he kept running, legs burning, lungs screaming for air. He wasn't stopping, not now, not after all this. Ross Weiss swooped down effortlessly, landing in front of him, cutting off his path. She tilted her head in mock curiosity. Do you think this little game is fun, Leon? You don't find it too easy, do you? Leon, panting and seething, glared at her. What's your point? He spat. She flicked her tail playfully. Don't you wonder who helped you, who diverted the guards and left that little escape route for you? His heart sank. Of course it had been a setup. He'd known deep down. But what choice had he had? Even if I knew it was a trap, he growled, I had to try. Ross Weiss's eyes sparkled with twisted satisfaction. And yet here I am catching you so quickly. Tell me, Leon, what do you think will happen if you return to human territory with my mark on your chest? Her voice was sweet, but the threat was unmistakable. Do you think they'll still see you as the great dragon slayer? Leon gritted his teeth. I'd rather live as an ordinary person than be tortured by you. Ross Weiss laughed, a deep guttural sound that echoed through the trees. You really don't appreciate my kindness, do you? With a powerful sweep of her tail, she wrapped it around him, lifting. Before he could finish his sentence, Ross Weiss had already pinned him against a tree, her breath hot against his neck. Feeling a little warm, aren't you? She whispered, unable to resist. Liam's mind was racing. Here, you want to do this right here, in front of the Empire? He was incredulous and a bit mortified. though that feeling was becoming increasingly hard to maintain under the circumstances. His body betrayed him, and he cursed the damn dragon magic. Ross Weiss's voice dripped with sarcasm as she leaned in closer. I thought it would be fitting for you to experience the Shane right here. So close, yet so far from home. Her tail coiled around him and her grin widened. Leon, clutching his chest, tried to regain control. If you think this is going to break me, you're wrong, he declared, voice firm despite his current predicament. I'll wait patiently. When the time comes, I'll repay you double for all the humiliation you've put me through. Ross Weiss paused, her expression unreadable for a moment, before she closed her eyes and nodded. I look forward to it, Leon. Whether you return alive or dead, I'll be waiting. The intimate moment passed, and afterward, Ross Weiss stretched for the satisfied sigh. Chapter 4. She casually slipped into her clothes and turned toward Leon, who lay in a heap on the ground. His body felt as though it had been run over by a wagon, his energy completely drained. She couldn't help but smile, her voice light and teasing as she spoke. Well, I must say I'm very pleased with your performance. It far exceeded my expectations. Leon, barely able to move, let out a pained groan, his voice barely a whisper. I'm glad one of us is pleased. Ross Weiss knelt beside him, her hand reaching out to gently pat his cheek, almost as if he were a tired, overexerted pet in need of comfort. How about I bring you back here every month to visit your hometown? She teased. Wouldn't that be sweet? Leon's eyes flew open in horror, his expression one of genuine disbelief. No thanks, he managed to croak, his voice laced with exhaustion. I'm pretty sure you've got your head in the clouds, dreaming about draining me dry. He smiled, clearly amused by his quick wit. Oh, you're catching on, she remarked. You've seen right through my plans, haven't you? With a carefree flap of her wings, she was already preparing to take off, her movements fluid and graceful. Come on, she urged, her tone bright and cheerful. Let's go home. Our daughter is waiting for us. Leon, still struggling to gather his strength, ground his teeth together, pushing himself up from the ground with great effort. Wait, he said, voice tight with determination, his face contorted in pain. I'm a dragon slayer, not some pet. I can walk on my own. Thank you very much. Ross Weiss raised an eyebrow at him, her expression half amused, half intrigued. Walk, she repeated as if she were trying to wrap her mind around the idea. It takes me 3 hours to fly to the castle. For a human like you, it would take, what? 10 days? 2 weeks. Despite the overwhelming exhaustion tugging at his every limb, Liam gritted his teeth and forced himself to stand, wobbling for a moment before finding his balance. I may be human, he muttered, his voice strained but resolute, but don't underestimate my endurance. I'll make it, one way or another. She chuckled, clearly entertained by his stubbornness. Oh, this should be good. Let's see how long you last. And so Leon trudged through the forest, each step more laborious than the last. After what felt like hours, he could barely move, his legs trembling under the strain. Ross Weiss, floating lazily above him, finally called down, You look like you're struggling, Leon. Need a ride back? I'm not tired, he panted, refusing to admit defeat. Who said I was? Ross Weiss smirked. The only thing tough about you is your mouth. She twirled in the air, clearly enjoying his misery. Before Leon could reply, he noticed a group of armored figures approaching. His heart leaped. Dragon slayers. This could be it, he thought, suddenly hopeful. Maybe they can help me get rid of. He glanced back at Ross Weiss, who was watching the approaching army with a dark, murderous gleam in her eyes. His hope vanished instantly. If he called for help, she killed them without a second thought. The head of the group, a rugged man in armor, noticed them and waved. Hey there, you two lost. Liam, scratching his head awkwardly, forced a smile. No, just hanging out, in the forest. Yeah, great cover, Leon, real smooth. The man dismounted his horse, eyeing them curiously. Unusual place to hang out. There are dangerous creatures out here. He extended his hand. Walker, captain of the Imperial Dragon Squadron. You're welcome to join us. Leon, mentally screaming for Walker to turn around and run, forced another smile. Oh, thanks, but we're fine. We know some self-defense. Walker studied Leon for a moment. You look familiar. Have we met before? Liam froze, his eyes darting to Ross Weiss, whose expression had darkened significantly. Oh no, he acted quickly, grabbing Ross Weiss by the hand and pulling her close, wrapping an arm around her waist. Haha, must be mistaken, Leon said, flashing a forced grin. I got one of those faces. Even my wife. Confuses me sometimes, right, darling? Ross Weiss, eyebrow raised but playing along, smiled in a low voice. With a sickly sweet smile, Ross Weiss leaned into him. Of course, dear, she looked back at Walker and waved dismissively. We're just a happy couple. No need to worry. Walker chuckled, clearly convinced. I see. Well, I won't disturb you two lovebirds any longer. Take care. He mounted his horse and rode off with his men. As soon as they were out of sight, Ross Weiss stepped back, folding her arms. "Did you enjoy, boy, that little hug?" Liam glared at her, still catching his breath. "Don't think this means anything." She smirked. "You were smart not to call for help. Let's be clear, Leon. Just because we have a child together, it doesn't mean you're my husband." Leon scoffed. "Trust me, I never considered it." With a flick of her tail, Ross Weiss turned away. "Good. Now let's get going. We still have a long way to go." Leon's hand throbbed with a sharp, burning pain as he trudged through the forest. He gritted his teeth, feeling the wounds on his palm reopen, blood trickling through his fingers. His vision blurred, and the ground beneath him seemed to sway. "Damn it," he muttered, stumbling forward. But the pain intensified, and before he knew it, everything went black. He collapsed onto the dirt with a dull thud. Hearing the noise, Ross Weiss halted in mid-flight and turned around, sighing dramatically. "Humans, so fragile," she remarked, rolling her eyes. She casually released her power, transforming back into her magnificent dragon form, her scales gleaming in the moonlight. Scooping Leon with her mouth and tossing him into the air like a ragdoll, he landed with a soft thump on her back, still completely unconscious. Ross Weiss flew gracefully towards the silver dragon castle, glancing back at the limp figure sprawled across her back. This whole ordeal, just a pathetic plea for mercy, she mused, half amused, half bored. By morning, Leon was back. Chapter 5. In the Silver Dragon Castle, still blissfully unaware of his predicament, slowly he regained consciousness, his eyes fluttering open to the sight of bright, beaming face. "Dad's awake." Moo chirped cheerfully, bouncing on her toes beside his bed. Liam groaned, holding his aching head as he sat up. How did I end up back here?" he muttered, trying to shake off the fog. "Mom brought you home," Moo explained, practically glowing with pride. Liam's face darkened at the mention of Ross Weiss. "Of course she did. Caught me like prey," he grumbled under his breath, glaring at the ceiling as he noticed the bandage wrapped around his injured hand. Leon raised an eyebrow. "What's this?" he asked, gesturing toward the white cloth. Moo's eyes lit up, and she grabbed his hand enthusiastically. "I did it. I bandaged your hand, Dad," she beamed, clearly proud of her work. Liam stared at his daughter, feeling an odd mix of disbelief and warmth. Dragons are supposed to be ferocious. At this little one, she's as innocent as they come. He recalled what a dragonologist had once said about dragons being born into violence, raised on blood, yet here was Moon, half dragon, half human, treating him like the most important person in the world. "You're awesome, Moon," Leon said, patting her head with affection. Moon smiled so sweetly it almost hurt. Carefully, Leon added, "But listen, when you grow up, you must not become like your mother, okay?" Moon blinked up at him, her innocent eyes filled with confusion. Before she could respond, a cold voice came from the doorway. "And what's wrong with being like me?" Ross Weiss asked icily. Liam froze, caught off guard. He glanced at her, then quickly looked away, pretending to focus on something else. "Nothing," he muttered, feeling like a schoolboy caught talking back to the teacher. Newman, oblivious to the tension, proudly held up Leon's bandaged hand for Ross Weiss to see. "Look, Mom, I did it just like you told me to." Ross Weiss, her face expressionless, nodded. "Good. That's what you should do." Newen, eager to please, nodded vigorously, agreeing with her mother. Leon watched the interaction, his irritation growing. Strict. Way too strict. He knew Ross Weiss was a harsh mother, but Newen was just a kid. She didn't need this kind of pressure. Patting Newen's head again, Leon smiled down at her. "Hey, why don't you go hide in the garden, huh? I'll come find you when I count to 100, sound good?" Newen's eyes sparkled with excitement. "Really, Dad?" "We're going to play hide and seek." Leon nodded, smiling broadly. "Of course. I'm not like your mother. Now go, hurry." Giggling with delight, Moon dashed off toward the garden, calling back, "Don't count too fast." Leon chuckled as he watched her go, his smile fading as he turned to Ross Weiss, his expression hardened. "We need to talk." Ross Weiss raised an eyebrow, her gaze cold and calculating. "About?" Leon stood, facing her fully. "You're being way too hard on Moon. She's not like the other dragons, and besides, she's so cute. Can't you bear to be a little gentler?" Ross Weiss's eyes narrowed. "She's a dragon. Cute is not a compliment. It's an insult." Leon smirked, crossing his arms. "Well, for what it's worth, you're pretty cute too." Ross Weiss's eyes flared with anger. In a flash, she grabbed Leon by the collar and yanked him closer, glaring at him. "You're just a slave for me to vent my frustrations on. Don't get at it yourself." For a moment, Leon put on a cute, exaggeratedly pathetic face, his eyes wide with mock innocence. Ross Weiss, her anger still simmering, softened slightly and pulled him into a rough hug. "It's good that you understand." She leaned in close, her breath tickling his ear. "Remember, Leon, I'm the queen of the Silver Dragon clan. I have government affairs to deal with. The task of taking care of Moon falls to you." Leon blinked, caught off guard by the sudden shift in her tone. What? Ross Weiss pulled back slightly, a wicked smile on her face. The kid likes you. You're her favorite, after all. Gathering himself, Leon headed toward the garden. As Leon strolled through the garden, Ross Weiss's words echoed in his mind. I'm the Dragon Queen, and I'm busy. He chuckled bitterly to himself. Of course, who better to leave with the kid than the Dragon Slayer? Makes perfect sense. Not like I have anything better to do like slay. Dragons, maybe. He sighed, feeling the irony heavy in his chest. The Queen of Dragons was too occupied with her royal duties, so naturally the terrifying, battle-hardened Dragon Slayer had to play nanny. His thoughts were interrupted when he noticed Moon hiding, not very well, mind you, behind a pillar, peeking at him. Her tiny body was barely concealed, and her tail swayed behind her like a flag in the wind. Leon smirked. Cute. Too cute. Does she really think I can't see her? He pointed at her dramatically. Found you, Moon, he announced in his best dad voice, expecting a giggle or at least some kind of reaction, but nothing. Not a sound. Moon simply stared at him with an unnervingly cold expression, her eyes void of the usual playful warmth. The silence dragged on, the wind whistling through the garden as if mocking him. Leon felt a pang of awkwardness, scratching the back of his head. Oh, did I screw this up? He cleared his throat and tried to make amends. Hey, sorry for making you wait. His voice faltered as he watched her unblinking stare, and then, without a word, Moon bolted, her little feet carrying her away like a gust of wind. Wait, what? Moon. Leon called after her, confused. Why are you running? Come on, kid. He sprinted after her, trying to catch up. What's with the sudden mood swing? Kids are like dragons, completely unpredictable. Moon turned the corner, and by the time Leon reached the spot, she was gone. He stopped, breathless, looking around in bewilderment. Where the hell did she go? He muttered to himself, spinning around. He had just seen her dart past, but now it was as if she'd vanished into thin air. Leon sighed, wiping his brow. This is why Ross Weiss stuck me with this job. She knew I'd be running circles around this garden, trying to figure out how a child's mind works. He shook his head, half amused, half frustrated. Just as he was about to call out again, Moon reappeared, seemingly out of nowhere. Beaming with delight, she rushed up behind him and hugged him tightly around the waist. Gotcha, Dad. She squealed, her cheerful voice cutting through his confusion. Leon blinked in surprise, turning to look down at her. Wait, hold on. Didn't you just run past me? Why were you running? Moon looked up at him with innocent confusion, tilting her head. Run? I didn't run, Dad. I was looking for you because you couldn't find me, she explained, her voice so sincere it made. Leon second-guessed his own memory. Leon furrowed his brow. What do you mean I couldn't find you? He paused, realizing he was trying to win an argument with a child. Did I imagine that? He glanced around the garden, still trying to piece together what had just happened. Am I losing it? I swear I saw her. But before he could spiral further, Moon grabbed his hand, tugging at him with all the enthusiasm of a child with a secret. Come on, Dad, I have something to show you. You have to see it, she chirped, dragging him along. Leon, still puzzled but unable to resist her excitement, allowed himself to be pulled forward. All right, I'm coming, he grumbled, though the corner of his mouth twitched into a smile. What could possibly go wrong now as they walked deeper into the garden, however, Leon wasn't aware of the other Moon standing silently behind him, watching him with a mix of determination and hesitation, her small hands clenched into tiny fists. And though she did make a sound, it was clear she wanted to approach him, yet something held her back, something deeper in her nature, colder, harsher. Chapter 6. In the peaceful serenity of the dragon's garden, Moon, Leon's adorable half-dragon daughter, hums away joyfully as she sketches with intense focus. Leon, sitting nearby, watches her with that soft, mushy expression only a father can have. For a moment, this hardened dragon slayer, the man who once dreamed of only slaying these creatures, feels his soul inexplicably healed. Who knew having a daughter could be so heartwarming? It's almost suspicious. As Moon proudly finishes her drawing, Leon's mind races. Clenching his fist with determination, he resolves to save his sweet Momo from the clutches of a silver dragon queen. Sooner or later, he thinks, he will escape this scaly overlord. Moon bounces over, holding her masterpiece. Dad, look, I drew a family portrait. She beams at him with those innocent, dragon-sized eyes. Liam's chest swells with pride. You're awesome, Mo, truly worthy of being your daddy's daughter, he praises, convinced that his bloodline has produced sheer artistic genius. But then his eyes narrow. Wait, what's this? Why are there 4 people in the drawing? His heart skips a beat. Pointing to the extra child, he asks, Moon, why are there 2 kids here? Without missing a beat, Moon cheerfully replies, that's my sister. Leo's world screeches to a halt. Sister. The realization crashes over him like a tidal wave of regret. He didn't just hit the target once. Nope, he apparently knocked out a 2-for-1 deal. Holding his head, he groans internally. That child I saw in the garden, that's why she looked ready to incinerate me when I called her the wrong name. Neum, completely unfazed by her father's internal meltdown, observes him with curiosity. Neum thinks her sister isn't mad. She's just shy when she sees Dad. Leon, wearing a look of utter disbelief but trying to hold it together, nods. Yeah, totally normal. We haven't exactly had the best meet-your-long-lost father moments, huh? As he glances toward the massive dragon castle in the distance, his thoughts turn darker. It's all the dragon's fault, hiding one of my kids from me. Typical dragon behavior. This has gone on long enough. With newfound fury, Leon decides he's getting answers now. Minutes later, the door to Ross Weiss's study slams open with enough force to shake the whole room. Startled, the little dragon perched on the desk lets out a tiny squeak while Ross Weiss calmly places a document into an envelope, barely batting an eye at Leon's dramatic entrance. Ross Weiss, Leon growls, fists clenched, eyes blazing with a mixture of anger and confusion. Why didn't you tell me I had another daughter? The silver dragon queen raises an eyebrow, her lips curling into an amused smirk. You didn't know already? She asks with the tone of someone asking if he'd forgotten his own name. Leon slams his fist onto the desk, the sound echoing through the room. You've been hiding her. I have to thank you. What a shock. Giving birth to one kid is hard enough, but you went ahead and gave me two. Such dedication. His voice drips with sarcasm. When I return to the Empire, I'll make sure your name's carved into our family tree for this hard work. Ross Weiss, clearly enjoying this, folds her arms and tilts her head. And do you know why I didn't tell you about our eldest? Her eyes glint with amusement. Leon, still riding the wave of righteous indignation, snaps because you're jealous of how close I am to Muen. You've been keeping Noah from me out of spite, haven't you? Ross Weiss, still smirking, leans forward. Oh, so now you're eager to meet her? Of course, Leon shoots back arrogantly. What kind of father wouldn't want to meet his own daughter? Unlike you, I'm not some cold, stern dragon mother. I want to bond with my child. Ross Weiss lets out a low chuckle. Very well, I'll show you, but don't come crying to me when you regret it. Her eyes gleam with a cryptic challenge. In the cozy chaos of the kitchen, Leon laughs heartily, brandishing a knife like he's starring a cooking show. Ross Weiss. He shouts with a grin, expertly slicing vegetables like he's auditioning for Dragon. Chef. Oh yes, today's the day he'll impress her, the mother of his children, and more importantly, his eldest daughter. His grand plan, winning her over with a delicious home-cooked meal. Because of course nothing says please love me, daughter, I never knew I had like a hearty cream stew. As he stirs the pot, memories flood back. He used to make this very stew for his old team back when he wasn't juggling fatherhood and dragons with killer side eyes. Everyone said it was good back then, he muses, tasting the stew and nodding in satisfaction. Still got it. He imagines Noah, the eldest, the cold one, taking a bite, her icy demeanor melting away as she declares Dad's cooking is the best. Outside the kitchen, the maids peek in through the window, clearly baffled. The prince is cooking again, one whispers. Didn't he just recover from a near-death experience and now he's whipping up a 5-course meal? He's a good male dragon, though, caring for his family like that, her friend nods. Good dragon, but is it just me, or is he too eager? Before they can theorize further, the regal figure of Ross Weiss approaches with their 2 daughters in tow. Mune, bubbly as always, and Noah, glaring like she's already plotting world domination. The maids bow deeply, addressing her as Your Majesty, while Mune waves like she's on a parade float. Noah, predictably, stares at them as if they're beneath her notice. Ross Weiss dismisses the maids, telling them to take the night off. Go rest, she says, her voice cold as ever. We won't need you for dinner tonight. The maids bow in gratitude, practically fleeing the scene. Something tells them this meal won't be a typical family dinner. Inside the kitchen, Leon finishes setting the table, beaming with pride as Ross Weiss and the girls enter. Perfect timing, he says, rubbing his hands together. Mune runs up to him with a big smile. Dad, it smells so good. Leon grins, patting her head. I heard you both love meat, so I made stew and steak just for you. He beams even more as he glances at Noah, trying to gauge her reaction. Surely his culinary skills will break through that icy exterior, right? Wrong. Noah doesn't smile, doesn't blink, heck, she barely looks at him. Instead, she stares coldly for a moment, then turns away without saying a word. Leon's grin falters, his jaw drops as his hopeful fantasy shatters into a million pieces. Wait, what? He thought. This would be the moment. He made stew, for crying out loud. How could she resist the stew? Glancing nervously at Ross Weiss, who stands there with her usual smug expression, he clenches his teeth. Of course it's her, he thinks bitterly. She must have planned this. That dragon has always had the upper hand, and now she's using their daughter to hit him where it hurts. Introduce yourself, Noah, Ross Weiss commands coolly, clearly enjoying the tension. This is your first formal meeting. Noah steps forward, arms folded, mirroring her mother's stoic posture. On Noah K. Melver, she says, flatly, like a disinterested secretary reading off a grocery list. The eldest daughter of the Silver Dragon. Queen, I'm 1 year and 2 months old. Leon, still trying to salvage the situation, extends his hand with a forced smile. Leon Cosmo, your father, he says, hoping for some spark of connection. Come on, just say something nice, he pleads internally. Just one little hi, Dad. Noah stares at his hand as if it's a dead fish. Oh, she replies, giving him absolutely nothing, no warmth, no recognition, just a single syllable of pure indifference. Leon awkwardly chuckles, but inside he's dying. Why does she hate me? Is it the stew? Is she allergic? Meanwhile, Mo, ever the mediator, leans over to whisper in Noah's ear, don't be so cold. Dad worked. Really hard on this, she hisses. Noah folds her arms tighter, narrowing her eyes at Leon. He seems weak, she says bluntly. Is he really our father? Boom, the words hit Lon like a thunderclap. He stumbles back, clutching his chest dramatically, as if she just stabbed him with a sword. Weak me, he coughs, half choking on the pain. This child is merciless. His pride, his dragon slayer pride, is in tatters. This is worse than any battle wound. As Leon grimaces, trying to process this emotional beatdown, he thinks bitterly, what a filial daughter. His career as a father has officially entered its first major crisis, and it's not looking good. As Leon finishes setting the table, he feels the familiar knot of dread tightening in his stomach. Chapter 7. Family dinners, once a peaceful sanctuary, have become a battlefield where his soul is roasted more than the meal itself. He takes his seat, plastering on a strained smile as he looks at his 2 daughters, especially Noah. Maybe this time she'll compliment his cooking. Maybe pigs will fly. The food is served, and before Leon can even exhale, Noom asks Noah to help her cut the meat. Of course Noah does it, without a word. She's always been the spitting image of her mother, cold, distant, and terrifyingly efficient. Meanwhile, Mune, like sunshine wrapped in innocence, is a stark contrast that only makes Leon's life more complicated. As Noah slices the meat, Leon, with an almost hopeful tone, asks, do you like the food today, Noah? Without even blinking, Noah spits out her answer, disgusting. Leon feels the blow like a punch to the gut. The word echoes in his head as if she just set fire to his entire culinary dream. Disgusting. Ouch. Ross Weiss, his wife sitting across from him, finds it hilarious. Her laughter rings out like a bell, amused by her daughter's brutally honest critique. Mune, ever the curious one, turns to Ross Weiss. Mom, why are you laughing? With a sweet yet sharp smile, Ross Weiss replies, because your dad's so happy to be reunited with the family. Isn't that right, dear? She throws Leon a look that could freeze hell over. Why aren't you smiling? Leon, trying not to die inside, forces a grin so fake it could be sold on eBay. Of course, I'm happy, so happy. Mune, her innocent eyes shining, asks Daddy, can you have dinner with us every day? The question catches Leon off guard, and internally he screams, every day with this driviness? God, no. But for Mune's sake, he manages a smile and is about to give a diplomatic answer when Noah, in her usual acidic tone, cuts in no. Mune looks shocked, why not? Because Noah replies without a hint of hesitation. I want to study in the Young Dragon Department of Street Heath Academy. Ross Weiss raises an eyebrow, her smile turning a shade darker. The Young Dragon Department? Isn't that for dragons 4 or 5 years old? She leans forward, locking her eyes on Noah. Why are you so eager to go? Noah, with all the grace of a nuclear bomb, drops her reason. Because I want to defeat more dragon slayers. Leon mid-sip chokes. Dragon slayers? He stares at Noah, feeling the creeping realization that she's talking about him. She wants to defeat him, her own father. What a hallmark moment. Swallowing his surprise, Leon tries to be the voice of reason. Dragon slayers are very brave, and you're still so young. You could get hurt. Noah crosses her arms, a cocky smirk forming. Don't treat me like a child. Leon, blinking, can only think you are a child. But there's no winning here. His daughter has clearly inherited her mother's deadly self-confidence. Ross Weiss, ever the enabler, smiles like she's watching a soap opera. I think Noah's idea is excellent. The sooner she learns to fight, the sooner she can take on the dragon slayers. Leon glares at her. Oh, he sees it now, clear as day. This dinner isn't just a meal, it's a setup. Ross Weiss is using their daughter to torment him. She's weaponized family dinner. And then, as if reading his thoughts, Ross Weiss smirks. Isn't that right, Leon? Or do you have a reason to stop Noah? Liam grits his teeth, feeling the trap close around him. If he says no, Noah will hate him more. If he says yes, he'll be feeding Ross Weiss's monstrous ego. Stuck between a rock and a dragon, he sighs. No reason. I have no objection. Noah studies him with that same icy stare while Leon quietly stews in his frustration. He shoots a death glare at Ross Weiss, who is sitting there smug as ever. In his mind, he imagines her as a towering demoness, fork and knife in hand, her plate adorned with a tiny roasted version of himself. As rage simmers inside Leon, he thinks, just you wait, Ross Weiss, her ass is getting kicked later. As Ross Weiss smiles, she turns to Noel and declares, since your father is okay with it, it's happily decided. Her tone has that finality only a queen dragon could command. The entrance test for Street Heath Academy is in a month, and during this time, your father will personally help you prepare. Noel clenches her fists with determination, her icy exterior giving way to a brief glimmer of excitement. I'll train harder than ever, she says, as though preparing for war instead of school. Later, as the dinner winds down, Mulan, always the cheerful one, draws everyone's attention to her round belly. Noah, look, she says excitedly, poking her own stomach. It's so big. Noah, trying her best to look interested, reaches out and gently touches Moon's belly. Leon watches the moment from across the table, his eyes drifting to Ross Weiss. He clears his throat, a wicked thought crossing his mind, and calls her by name, not wife, not dear, but Ross Weiss. Ross Weiss raises an eyebrow, a dangerous glint in her eye as she turns to face him. Leon points to the pile of dirty dishes with a smug grin. These plates haven't been cleaned yet. Ross Weiss narrows her eyes. So, she replies, her tone icy. Well, Leon says, stepping closer, how about you and I clean up and wash the dishes together? You know, like a real family, creating that harmonious atmosphere you love so much. His smile is drenched in sarcasm, even if it's fake. Ross Weiss's lips curl into an irritated smile, her eyes darting to Moon, who is practically bouncing in her seat with excitement. No way out of this one. With a sigh, Ross Weiss finally relents. Fine. Moon, of course, jumps at the opportunity. I want to help too. Before she can get too excited, Noah grabs the back of Moon's dress, pulling her out of the room with the usual deadpan look on her face. Come with me, Moon. Moon, now making the most pitiful crying face, whines, but where are we going? Noah says nothing, driving her along. Meanwhile, Ross Weiss tosses the plates into the sink with more force than necessary. She picks up the apron, looks at Leon, and with that thin stretched patience she reserves just for him, asks, when are you going to help? Arms folded and grinning like he's won a victory, he replies coyly, did you forget what I said 2 years ago? He leans closer, his eyes flashing mischievously. You should never be left alone, the highly trained dragon slayer. The atmosphere shifts immediately. Ross Weiss's body tenses, her dragon mark glowing faintly beneath her skin. At the same moment, Leon's own mark begins to burn on his chest, a deep connection flaring to life between them. Ross Weiss's face hardens as she glares at him. What are you trying to do? Her voice is laced with both anger and something else, something much more dangerous. Leon steps even closer, his grin growing wider. Back then, I was exhausted. I traveled a long distance, and you took advantage of that, using your dragon pattern to control me. But now, his eyes gleam. Now things are different. Ross Weiss wastes no time. Her aura flares to life, wrapping around her body like a living flame as she lashes out with her dragon tail. A strike is aimed right at Leon's face, fast and brutal, but Leon catches it effortlessly in his hand. The aura-covered tail trembles in his grip, but Leon's eyes remain locked on hers, amused. You think I'm running away? He asks, holding her tail tightly. Ross Weiss's eyes widen as a moan escapes her lips. Her breaths grow heavy, her face turning red as the mark on her chest pulses with power. The once powerful and fearsome dragoness collapses to the ground, moaning softly, her body helpless beneath Leon's touch. He kneels down beside her, pinching her tail playfully. What's wrong, Your Majesty? Can't handle a little tail pinch? His voice drips with arrogance. Ross Weiss's chest heaves, her breath ragged as she stares at him, eyes wide with shock. Leon smirks, enjoying her reaction far too much. Turns out that your tail's as sensitive as a kitten's when it's pinched, he taunts, leaning in closer, his breath hot against her ear. I found that little tidbit in one of your precious dragon books. Ross Weiss's body trembles, her power utterly drained as she lies there helpless. Leon watches her closely, his expression cocky, enjoying every second of his sudden advantage. You dragons love to conquer everything, don't you? He whispers, his voice like a cruel caress. But tell me, Ross Weiss, have you ever been conquered? Her eyes widen in disbelief as his words sink in, and for the first time in a long time, Ross Weiss, the fearsome dragon, is at a loss for words. Chapter 8. Leon code from Ross Weiss's body as her breath grew heavier with every passing second, her face flushed crimson And despite the fire in her eyes, she struggled under his grip, clearly torn between resisting and giving in. With labored breaths, she hissed, "Let go of my tail, you bastard." But Leon, ever the smug conqueror of the moment, wasn't about to comply. His grip on her tail tightened and he gave it a pinch, sending shivers through her entire body. She gasped, her desires igniting further, and Leon couldn't help but watch her with an arrogant smirk plastered on his face. "Oh, now you want me to let go. Since the day I woke up, you've done nothing but stomp on my pride, treated me like your little pet toy for your amusement. What do you think about switching things up tonight?" Ross Weiss glared at him, her eyes burning with fury even as her body betrayed her. "You bastard," she growled, struggling to free herself from his hold. But Leon had her firmly in his grasp, enjoying every second of her helplessness. Just as things were reaching a boiling point, they heard a sudden burst of laughter from outside the door. Both Leon and Ross Weiss froze, their expressions shifting from passion to panic in an instant. They turned toward the door, eyes wide, as they listened to the familiar voices of the two maids responsible for the kitchen duties. "Oh, do you think Her Majesty's family time is over yet?" one of the maids asked, her voice dripping with playful curiosity. The other maid giggled in response, clearly enjoying the gossip. Suddenly, they opened the door, and guess what they see? The room sparkling clean. "I wonder if the prince has helped out this time," she mused. "Maybe that's why everything's so clean. His Majesty did mention getting his hands dirty, didn't he?" The two burst into a fit of giggles, completely oblivious to the scene unfolding just behind the closed door. Leon, his smirk fading quickly, dragged Ross Weiss behind a nearby counter, pulling her close as they both crouched down to avoid being seen. Ross Weiss, her body trembling and still betraying her, shot him a look that could have set him on fire if only she had her usual strength. But Leon, oh, he was still riding the high of their little power struggle. With one arm wrapped around her waist and the other lifting her chin, Leon leaned in close, his breath hot against her ear. "You don't want them to find us, do you, Your Majesty?" His voice was dripping with mockery, each word like a dagger aimed at her pride. Imagine the mighty dragon queen reduced to hiding like this, from her own maids no less. Ross Weiss, usually the embodiment of regal power, was now trembling in his grip, her face burning with both fury and the betrayal of her own body's desires. She opened her mouth to retort, but no words came out, only a frustrated, breathy sound of defeat. As the maids finished their conversation and finally closed the door, Leon let out a low chuckle. He tilted her face toward his, their eyes meeting as he spoke with that insufferable arrogance of his. "See, you did well, didn't you?" Ross Weiss, still trying to recover her composure, said nothing. Her silence was damning, her body, heated and betraying her every instinct, had left her powerless to respond. Leon, ever the victor, leaned in even closer, his lips brushing against her ear as he whispered, "Let's get started, my dear wife." Her wide eyes met his, her flushed face betraying the storm of emotions she couldn't contain, and as much as she hated it, in that moment the mighty dragon queen could do nothing but submit to the man she had once thought of as beneath her. 3 days had passed, and once again Leon found himself in a familiar position. Coma's in the Silver Dragon Castle, Moon and Noah, his ever-vigilant daughters, sat by his bedside waiting. Moon, her innocent face filled with concern, looked at her father and whispered, "Dad hasn't woken up for 3 days. Is he dead?" Noah, ever the cold and pragmatic one, didn't miss a beat. "Just wait and see," she muttered before casually kicking Leon in the face. Leon, still half conscious, groaned. It hurt so much his words came out as if from a bad dream, but clearly he wasn't fully gone yet. Noah, stepping on her father's face as if testing his durability, crossed her arms, completely indifferent. "He's not dead yet," she declared as if delivering a clinical diagnosis. Leon, battling his way back to consciousness, thought to himself, no one should treat their father like this. As his eyes slowly opened, the first face he saw was Moon's, her wide eyes filled with innocent cheerfulness. "Dad's awake." Moon practically shouted with joy, spinning around to announce it. "Mom, Dad's awake again." Leon sat up groggily, his body aching from a familiar source of torment. "When did I faint?" he asked, his voice weak, already sensing where this was going. Ross Weiss, casually tying her hair back with a graceful movement, glanced over her shoulder. "Do you need help remembering?" she asked with a smirk. Ah, right, the memories came flooding back like a bad hangover. That night, the night when he, after somehow conquering Ross Weiss's formidable strength, had enjoyed a brief moment of victory. Of course, Ross Weiss had quickly turned the tables as dragons tend to do. After their intimate encounter, she'd regained her composure, no, her rage, and had wrecked the entire kitchen in the ensuing fight. That final blow had sent him flying across the castle, straight into the deep, comforting arms of unconsciousness. Leon rubbed his aching head, recalling the moment she hit him so hard that the dragon pattern that once worked in his favor had been invalidated. His body still felt like it had been run over by a herd of dragons. As he sat there, he stole a glance at Ross Weiss, who was now elegantly doing her hair. Her face glowed with an almost ethereal beauty, and Leon, for a brief, baffling moment, thought to himself, she really is quite pretty for someone who's over 200 years old. Lost in thought, he stared at her, captivated by her radiant appearance. Moon, ever the concerned daughter, looked at him with wide eyes. "Why isn't Dad moving?" Noah, as cold as ever, folded her arms. "He's just staring at Mom like an idiot." Suddenly, a hairpin slipped from Ross Weiss's hand, clattering to the ground near Leon. He blinked out of his daze and instinctively picked it up. In an uncharacteristic moment of affection, he gently placed the hairpin back in her hair. For the first time in what felt like forever, he smiled at her genuinely. "This one suits you," he complimented her, surprising even himself. Ross Weiss raised an eyebrow, a smirk playing at her lips. Well, didn't expect you to be so considerate. Tell me, have you done this for other women before?" Leon's response was classic. Without missing a beat, he said, "When I was a kid, I used to comb the hair of my master's donkey. Got pretty skilled at it." Moon, her curiosity piqued, asked with wide-eyed wonder, "Dad, what's a donkey?" Leon, ever the jokester, grinned as he mimicked the stubbornness of a donkey. "Well, Moon, donkeys are a lot like dragons, you see. They've got 2 big ears, a tail, and they're very stubborn. And when they're unhappy, they like to hum and grumble, just like your mother." Hearing that, Ross Weiss's eyes flashed dangerously. "Excuse me," she growled, her smirk long gone. With a deadly serious expression, she punched Leon square in the chest, making him yelp in pain. Clutching his chest and wincing, Leon gasped, "I'm fine. Don't worry about me." His attempt to reassure Moon, who was now reaching out to him in a panic, didn't really do much to soothe her. Meanwhile, Noah, as cold and detached as ever, didn't even flinch. Arms folded, she watched the whole scene unfold without so much as a blink. Ross Weiss, ever the queen of surprise assignments, turned to Moon and Noah with a calm smile. "Your task today is to learn how to write your names, and your father will teach you." Leon, his eye twitching in frustration, snapped, "You assign me another task without my permission," his voice, carrying that familiar tone of disbelief mixed with the resignation of a man who knew he was powerless in this situation. Moon, on the other hand, could not contain her excitement. She bounced with joy, clapping her hands together. "Yay. Dad will teach us how to write." No, ever the Frost Queen barely blinked. "I already know how to write," she said coldly, clearly unamused by the idea of being taught anything. Ignoring Noah's deadpan reaction, Moon, still bubbling with energy, grabbed her sister's hand and led her out of the room. "Come on, let's go to the study room and find a pen with nice colors," she chirped, her optimism undeterred. "Which color do you want?" Without skipping a beat, Noah replied, "Purple." As the two girls skipped off, Ross Weiss, in a casual tone, dropped her next bombshell. "Oh, by the way, my sister is coming to visit today. I don't want you appearing in front of her." Liam froze, caught completely off guard. His jaw hung slightly open as he blinked at her. "Wait, you won't even let me meet your family?" he asked, incredulous. Ross Weiss, stepping closer to him, lowered her voice to a whisper, her breath tickling his ear as she spoke. "In the story I made up, you're now a male dragon who married into the Silver Dragon clan. You've been in a coma for 2 years due to some disease and have just woken up recently." She tapped his chest with her index finger, a smug smile playing at her lips. "So if it comes to the point where you have to meet her, you'll have to play along with the identity I created." Leon wanted to argue. His brain screamed at him to counter this absurdity, but somehow no words formed. He just stood there staring at her as the ridiculousness of the situation sunk in. Finally, defeated, he muttered, "I got it, Your Majesty." Ross Weiss, clearly pleased with herself, simply shrugged and said, "Whatever you want," before turning to leave. Watching her walk away, Leon's eyes narrowed, his expression a storm of silent rage. "Female dragon," he thought bitterly, as if the words themselves were a curse. He ground his teeth, fists clenched at his sides. "If she thinks I'm just going to listen to her obediently." Suddenly, his lips curled into a wicked smirk. A dangerous, mischievous glint flashed in his eyes as he watched Ross Weiss disappear down the hallway. "I'm going to embarrass her in front of her sister." The thought alone was enough to warm his soul, and he chuckled to himself as he started plotting his petty revenge. Chapter 9. In the cozy study of Silver Dragon Castle, Leon finds himself in an entirely different kind of battlefield, teaching his 2 daughters, Moon and Noah, how to write their names. It's a task that should be simple, but of course it's Leon we're talking about, so nothing ever goes according to plan. "All right, girls, watch carefully," Leon says with fatherly pride, drawing the letters on 2 small pieces of paper. Moon, with her wagging little tail and bright eyes, watches her father like he's revealing the secrets of the universe. Noah, on the other hand, crosses her arms and glances at the paper as if it's beneath her dignity to even acknowledge this primitive scribbling exercise. Typical Noah, expressionless, cold, but definitely judging. Handing each of them their papers, Leon instructs, just copy what I wrote, practice it a few times. Moon, her excitement barely contained, stares at her name like it's a masterpiece, eagerly nodding. Noah, well, she's looking at the paper with the same intensity she'd reserve for a speck of dirt on her shoe. Not as good as what Mom wrote, No declares, her voice icy enough to freeze the ink. Leon blinks, caught off guard by her brutally honest critique. Before he can even think of a witty comeback, he quickly stands up. Oh, right. I forgot to give something to your mother. He waves at them cheerfully as he heads for the door. I'll check on your progress later. Moon, ever the sweet one, waves back at her dad with a smile so warm it could melt a glacier. No. Meanwhile, shoots a cold glare his way. Is he stupid? She mutters, deadpan. Moon gables at her sister's remark, enjoying the rare moment of snark. Noah, clearly flustered by being caught with a hint of emotion, denies any joy. I'm not laughing, just hurry up and write, she grumbles, folding her arms even tighter. But as Noah turns back to the paper, her usual icy demeanor softens just a little. Her cheeks, faintly pink, blushing. Surely not. Or maybe, just maybe, her father's bumbling charm got to her after all. At the gates of Silver Dragon Castle, Ross Weiss is buzzing with excitement as she sees her elder sister, Isabelle, the Red Dragon Queen, enter. Ross dashes over, throwing her arms around her sister in a rare moment of unguarded cheerfulness. Long time no see, she exclaims, her usual stern demeanor replaced with warmth. Isa, taking in her sister's newfound rosiness, raises a brow and remarks, you look glowing. Ross Weiss blushes and self-consciously holds her cheek. Do I? No way. I don't think that's true at all, she stammers, obviously flustered but trying to maintain her cool exterior. Isa's sharp gaze surveys the surroundings before she changes the subject. I heard your husband woke up. Why isn't he here to greet me? She asks, her tone laced with curiosity. Ross bursts into a small, awkward laugh, waving her hand dismissively. Oh, Leon's not feeling well today. Otherwise, he would definitely be here. Of course, she leaves out the part where Leon's illness was more like a strategic retreat from Isa's intimidating presence. Isa's disappointment is clear. That's too bad. I was looking forward to seeing the Dragon King who kidnapped you. She leans closer, lowering her voice. Is it true that the bond between you two is purely political? No love at all? Ross Weiss freezes at the implication. Political? Who said that? She huffs, turning her head away, blushing deeply. Just because we had kids doesn't mean we're in love or anything. Not now, not in the future. Asa chuckles knowingly. Still trying to act tough, she teases. But Ross, unwilling to admit defeat, changes the subject in her typical Ross fashion by clinging to her sister's arm and suggesting they visit the garden, a classic diversion tactic. As they walk towards the garden, completely unaware of the periscope sneaking up from the shadows, Leon, being Leon, is spying on them from the castle. He watches them closely, mentally cataloging everything. So that's her sister, huh? Let's see just how far this dragon business goes, he mutters to himself, already plotting some ridiculous scheme. Down in the garden, the air grows more serious. Asa mentions the instability in the dragon clans lately, especially with a red flame dragon king making moves. Constantine's been more active recently, she says, her tone grim. Ross Weiss stiffens at the name, her expression shifting to one of concern. Constantine? He's been off the radar for years, Ross mutters, her worry creeping in. Isa shrugs. Who knows? He's always been a hothead, and maybe he's trying to expand his territory again. As the words settle, Ross feels a sudden, unwelcome sensation. The dragon mark on her chest starts to glow, her eyes widen in shock. Isa, ever the observant sister, notices Ross's brief distraction. What's wrong? While Isa continues talking about border defenses and sending Xenon for updates, Ross is desperately trying to suppress the burning sensation coursing through her. Her face reddens, her body trembling as she's wrapping her arms around herself in a futile attempt to control the dragon mark's influence. Barely able to focus, Ross thinks to herself, if this keeps up, I'm going to lose it. She lets out a soft moan, her control slipping. Isa, now genuinely concerned, turns back to Ross and asks, Little Rose, are you sure you're okay? Ross, blushing furiously and struggling to maintain her composure, quickly comes up with an excuse. I just remembered something urgent. I'll be back in 20 minutes, she blurts out, spinning on her heel and storming off before Isa can say another word. Isa watches her sister retreat and sighs knowingly. Ah, the dragon mark. Young people these days, always playing with fire, she chuckles to herself, amused by the situation. Liam, lounging in his corner, smugly contemplates the chaos he set in motion. Let's see how long Ross Weiss can keep her cool. He muses to himself, imagining the fireworks when she finally snaps. The thought brings a smirk to his face, but his little victory is cut short when the door flies open and an absolutely furious Ross Weiss stomps in, slamming the door with the force of a dragon. Leon, she shouts, her voice filled with fiery wrath. Oh, he knows that tone. Still, he plays it cool, acting completely oblivious as he tilts his head lazily. Oh, back already? What's the rush? He asks, feigning innocence, though the wicked glint in his eyes betrays him. Ross doesn't waste a second. In a blur of motion, she's right up in his face, grabbing him by the collar with enough force to make him stumble. You did this on purpose, didn't you? Making the dragon pattern resonate, embarrassing me in front of my sister like that. Her face is flushed with rage, her grip tightening with each word. Leon, sensing the storm coming, realizes it's time to play his trump card, time to be pathetic, his favorite strategy. His eyes go wide with fake hurt, and he puts on his best puppy dog expression as though her accusation has wounded his tender soul. Is it wrong for me to want you? He asks softly, his voice trembling with mock vulnerability. The moment the words leave his mouth, Ross Weiss freezes. Her grip loosens, and before she knows it, her hands fall from his collar. Her face turns redder than her namesake. The embarrassment hits her like a tidal wave, and she quickly hides her face with one hand. How did he do that? 1 second, she was about to throttle him, and the next she's as flustered as a schoolgirl. Leon can barely contain his grin. It worked, he thinks, genuinely shocked. The woman who could crush him in her sleep is blushing like a tomato. He half expects her to kill him on the spot, but instead she glares at him, sputtering, "Oh, you're shameless." A defeated prisoner talking nonsense like that. Leon just keeps smiling, watching her try to regain her composure. There's something hilarious about the sight of Ross Weiss, feared by all, squirming under a few soft words. Dirty thoughts, put them away right now, she snaps, her voice quivering more from embarrassment than anger. He stays quiet, still grinning like a cat who got the cream. Ross Weiss huffs and spins on her heel, muttering about how lucky he is this time. Do this again, and next time I won't let you off so easily, she warns, storming out with a flustered look still plastered on her face. The door slams shut behind her, leaving Leon grinning like a madman. Leon scoffs inwardly, secretly relishing the rare moment of satisfaction. He can hardly believe how easily he made the terrifying Ross Weiss flustered with just a few words. A chuckle escapes him as he thinks, this dragon pattern really is something else. But then, as if a switch flips in his mind, a sudden thought hits him like a bolt. His heart races, an unfamiliar fluttering in his chest that makes him pause. What's going on? Why does the thought of her blushing face, of her being caught off guard, make him feel giddy? He swallows hard, trying to make sense of it all. Get a grip, Leon, he mutters under his breath, shaking his head as if to physically clear the erratic thoughts. Before he can dwell on this strange reaction any longer, the reality of his responsibilities crashes into him. His daughters are still waiting at home, Moon probably causing trouble, and Noah, undoubtedly, holed up in her study, nose buried in some work or another. Moon's probably slacking off, he thinks, while Noah's over there grinding away like the little overachiever she is.